All right. So, welcome to the August session of the Daring to Learn webinar series. My name is Elena Boyd. I am an extension specialist with the UT Center for Profitable Agriculture. If this is your first time joining us for Daring to Learn, welcome. If you are one of our return members, welcome back. Today we have Dr. Caitlin Zaring-Weir from the UT Department of Animal Science here to talk with us about some of the SDBII decision support tools that the Southeast Dairy Business Innovation Initiative has to offer our dairy producer processors. Um, just some kind of housekeeping items before we get started. For those of you that have been on a Daring to Learn session before, you all know the drill. We will have a copy of these PowerPoint slides available for you guys at the end of the session. We are recording this live session, and this will be posted to the Center for Profitable Ag's YouTube channel at the conclusion of our live session today. If any of you have any questions throughout today's webinar, you can feel free to pop those into the chat box. There's also a Q&A feature, a way to raise your hand. There's a couple of different ways to get a hold of us if you have any questions throughout our live session today. If you do have a question that's maybe a little bit more complicated and you need to ask that verbally, we can turn your microphones on, but just kind of by default, everyone's microphones and cameras are turned off. So if you have any questions, like I said, feel free to use one of those ways to get a hold of us. And I will go ahead and remind you guys on the front end, there is a evaluation survey that will be on a PowerPoint slide at the end of this session. This is a great way for you guys to share feedback about what you learned today. And other past sessions, how Daring to Learn runs in general, that kind of thing. For our Tennessee producers, if you are seeking Tennessee Agricultural Enhancement Program credit, that's that TAE program, TAEP, excuse me, from the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. You can qualify for one of those special education credits by participating in the Daring to Learn webinar series throughout the year. So you need to watch 5 of those videos and complete 5 of those evaluation surveys in order to qualify for that credit. So that evaluation survey, there's a QR code and a link at the end of this session. We'll pop that up on the screen for you guys. So that's for our Tennessee producers. I will go ahead now and kick us off and let Dr. Weir get us started and introduce herself. If my slides will work. Let's see. Sorry, guys, I'm having that same issue we had last time where my Zoom is in the way and I can't get back to where I'm screen sharing. Give me just a second. Caitlin, if you would like, feel free to start. Oh, there it is. Sorry, guys. We have moved to one giant screen instead of multiple, and sharing through Zoom is not the same as it used to be. All right, can you see this now? Okay,
Yes.
all right, I will let you take over and introduce yourself, and then I'll stop screen sharing and you can drive from there.
Sounds good. So my name is Dr. Caitlin Zaring-Weir. I'm a research assistant at the University of Tennessee in the Department of Animal Science. I just recently, about a year ago now, actually, in 3 days, it'll be about a year ago, graduated with my PhD in animal science. I also received my master's from the same department under the dairy extension specialist, Dr. Elizabeth Eckelkamp, as well as a minor in agricultural resource economics, which is where you'll see a little bit today coming through with that ag-econ background. I mostly focus on looking at surveys for Tennessee farmstead dairies, understanding what consumers want in these products. But I also build decision tools and I do a little bit here and there. I'm a very multifaceted approach researcher. And I extended my research across the Southeast. Now we look much more than just Tennessee, but that's a little bit of a rundown of me. I will go ahead and share my screen if it will let me. Let's see. You'll have to bear with me because I'm terrible at sharing screens. So let's see. Okay. Can you guys see the full slideshow or do you still see?
We can see the full one.
Okay, perfect. So you don't see presenter view.
Correct.
Beautiful. Okay. Okay. So I have just a couple slides, and then what I would like to do is actually just do a walkthrough of some of the tools that we have. Let's see if it will. There we go. So we'll go over a little bit of background, just very briefly of what on-farm processing is. We will jump into the bottled milk decision tool, which was the first one, and you'll get a little bit more background as we go through. And then if there's time, depending on if nobody has questions or if we have really good discussion, we may not have time for the cheese decision tool. However, I'm more than happy to stay on for a little bit longer and go over that as well if there's anybody who's interested. So starting out, I'm sure quite a few of you already know, but on-farm processing is where a farmer takes the raw milk, they process that raw milk into a product that can be sold to consumers. That could be a cheese, a milk, ice cream, yogurt, butter, cream. There's many different things we can do. And then they market it as well. So they market it directly to consumers, or what we sometimes see as D2C. Consumers value these products for their high quality, production methods, local origins, and perceived increased animal welfare and environmental sustainability. This is all things that have been found through some of my research as well as some other research in the United States. So why might we consider on-farm processing? There we go. I was hiding my meeting control panels. So there are many benefits and challenges, and there are many that are not listed on screen. I'm a very visual person, so I had some visuals pulled together for this. But for looking at some of our benefits, we do see benefits in the increased income and varied income source through on-farm processing, through product diversification, as well as greater market control and the ability to work with a local market, as well as getting to know and interact with our consumers, which is something that our Tennessee farmers have really said highly that they enjoy. They like being able to interact and talk with the consumers, know where their product is going, and answer questions. And there are some challenges that are associated with on-farm processing. Some of those include capital investment. If any of you are currently processing or are considering it right now, I'm sure you're well aware of the capital investment. So the equipment cost, the building cost. There's many things that can play into this. We also have challenges in labor. Labor is very tricky for us to get sometimes. And then if we add on top of the farm labor that we need, now we need processing labor. We need if we have a farm store, someone to man and work our farm store, keep up with inventory, someone to do books. There's many different ways that we are now adding on labor requirements. Added regulatory knowledge and compliance. The knowledge is a big one. You guys are pretty used to, as farmers, working with regulatory in the sense of the farm, but there are some differences for processing. So now that's just one element that we now have to learn and figure out how to navigate. Additionally, we have our market and sales responsibilities. That again comes in with that added knowledge that is not something that we're really used to seeing and handling. Oh, and now my slides. There we go. Okay. So when I was going through and during my master's, which is when I developed this first bottled milk tool, which you'll see in a moment, one of our big questions was, is on-farm processing even financially feasible? And that was really the benchmark for building this tool. And the answer is maybe. It can be, it might not be, but it's all operation dependent because there's no two operations that are the same. If I have operation A, that could be very different from operation B, and all of the decisions, everything from management to just our general views and philosophies of business, can affect whether or not something is financially feasible. And one of the big things is that it is can be hard to view these possibilities objectively. That's one thing that humans are really great about is we add in biases into our decision-making processes. And that's where decision tools can help. We can use these to help eliminate some of those biases. So these tools that we'll talk about today are designed to help producers evaluate potential processing enterprises in an unbiased manner before investing significant time and resources. And I mentioned the bias a little bit, and I'm not going to go. This is a slide that I use for a lot of my presentations. But essentially, all that it says is that when we as humans make decisions, our decisions can, whether intentionally or unintentionally, be driven by bias, emotions, and limited information. If we use something that eliminates that, we can see objective, data-driven insights. And so what that does is that can help us take out some of those bias and emotions to where we can make a more informed decision. Now, there's a lot on this one, but just some of the overview of what we can answer, questions we can answer with these tools. So our tools are designed to help us with our equipment. So what equipment might work best with my operation? What's an approximate equipment cost? What equipment can I grow with still? So if I purchase equipment option A in this capacity, will I be able to grow in 10 years or am I limiting myself in the future? We also have product type considerations. What types of products can I produce? What quantity of products can I produce? And will I have leftover supplies if I produce what I want? How much can my operation grow in the future? How much time will it take to actually process? This is a big one. What products are most profitable? How long will it take me to return a profit or what we call break even? And that's paying back that investment before we actually start to see a return. What sales volume do I need to break even or to return that profit? And how sensitive are my outcomes to my product pricing and input cost? So these are just some things. There are many other questions we can answer, but these are some of the big ones that we can answer. So, with that very short little spiel about just a little bit of the background, I want to spend the majority of the time actually going through the bottled milk. And then, if we have time, the cheese tool. That way, you can see these tools in action and I can answer any questions about as you have them. So, if we click on this, okay, and Elena, this is where I will need you. I clicked on the link. Can you see my internet browser?
So we're still seeing PowerPoint slides right now, I think.
Okay, perfect. Okay,
What I had to do earlier was stop sharing and then share again, if
okay,
that helps.
that does. Let me just share okay, let me share, try this one. We might have to do this two separate times, and that's okay. Okay, so can you see the internet browser now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to actually turn my video off. That way it stays out of the way for a moment from this, and that will make it a little bit easier. Okay. So I clicked on that link and that brought me to the UT Dairy page. And if you were to go, so that one brought me directly to the decision support tool page. However, if we were to type in just UT Dairy, this is our home landing page. If we go to resources and then hit that little arrow down, we see decision support tools. Click on that, and that's this landing page. This one gives us a little bit of an understanding of what's on this page. We have right now two live tools that I created. First is that bottled milk one, which we'll focus on, followed by the cheese one. There are more tools coming soon that we are in the works on that are still in planning phase, but right now these are the two that are up. So before we download that, we want to look at the user guide. So this is the key walkthrough. Oh, not sure why it started halfway down, but this is the key walkthrough. So this will give you, again, more background, what you need to actually use the tool. So we'll need milk production, milk quality metrics, our product packaging, cost, and equipment. And then this gives us our general start, and you'll see a note down here about macros, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that's essentially little things that go on in the background that allow this tool to function, so you will want to activate those. But as we scroll through, we go from page to page, and I won't go through this whole document. You can do that at a later date, but we do follow step 1, 2, 3, all the way down and through. So first thing we want to do is we want to download our tool. And then we will go to click on it and open this tool. And then I'm going to, while it's processing, I'm waiting on it to load right now. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm switching my screen now. Okay. Let me just make sure. Okay, so I have the Excel tool up. I'm going to hide my panel controls. Okay. So this is the Excel tool. And the first thing we want to do is we want to enable editing, which is at this top. Oh, and we're going to have a special error. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So we have this tool up. This is our main instruction landing page. What this does is this one, again, just tells us what the tool is. We have what equipment or what information we need. We have a reset and a clear button. These ones you don't need to worry about right now. All this is if you are testing different scenarios, say that you want to look at how, if you change your herd size, how that changes, you can reset and clear your numbers in here back to the initial. So if we hit start, oh, okay. We have to pause. I have to fix. So typically, it should, when you hit enable editing, it should have a pop-up window that says accept to where you can accept macros. Well, it did not give me that earlier. So we are going to go into here and go down to my settings. Um, I'm trying to figure out because I have not actually seen that one before, which is ironic, but okay. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 2 seconds and then I am going to, oh, once I figure out how to stop sharing. Uh, there we go. Okay, I apologize. We are having technical difficulties, but that's okay. You know what? It happens. I'm going to to close out of that. Um, okay. So all I am doing is I just closed out of that and then I reopened, but you all don't want to see the 9 million things I have open on my computer. It's very overwhelming. Okay, let's reopen that. Okay, and I'm resharing my screen. At least I think I am. Hmm.
We can't see anything
You still
yet.
can't. Okay.
Mm-mm.
Apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay. And now my computer's being slow. Whoa. There we go. Okay. Can you see my screen in the full screen mode?
Yes, yep, we can now.
Okay. And we still have that same error. Stop doing that. That's so funny.
I'm thinking you may need to turn the macros on in your
Oh, that's what I
settings.
was. That's what I was looking at, is how to go in and do that because the last time I did it, it
Try the
allowed me
trust
to.
center down there in the bottom.
Okay. So now you all are seeing the issues that we were troubleshooting for a couple weeks that we thought we had handled and then we actually hadn't handled. So this actually works out nicely because you can see, and if you guys have issues, you can reach out and I will gladly troubleshoot with you.
Under your macro
See.
settings.
Where do you even see? Oh, there we go.
Um,
Um,
okay, well, they're enabled.
yeah, that's what's weird because they are. Okay. So what I may do is I may actually pull up my actual file, not download, and then what I will do is I will troubleshoot after this webinar is over, figure out why it's doing that, and then I'm more than happy to, Elena, send you a thing that says that's a resolution. That way, if anybody sees this error, we know how to fix it.
Okay,
But that way, I'm not wasting time trying to figure out what is wrong with this when I clearly do not know currently. So that's
sounds
the way
good.
that we'll do that. Let's see. Okay. So I'm just going through right now and pulling up the exact same thing that we downloaded, that we're downloading. I just haven't, it's just on my screen or on my computer already. Let's see. Okay. Oh, come on. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay. I am resharing my screen with one that's open and okay. So, can you see my Excel?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I apologize for that. So like I said, I will figure out what's going on with that because that's very odd. And then I will send that out. That way you all know. But this is the exact same tool. This is just not one that I downloaded. Um, but it is the exact same one. This is the original that was then put online. So as I said, we scroll down here, and because we now have macros that are turned on and working, we hit start. And what that does is that brings us to this inputs page. You could move through and just click to this button, but I put those macros there to hopefully make it easier and a little bit more user friendly. We see errors, but that's okay. So on this screen, this is where we will input all of our information from our operation as well as what we want to do. And we will do that in the gray cells. So if we scroll down, we see a lot of gray cells. This gives us a lot of opportunity to go through and adjust to make it as personalized of a recommendation as possible. And these are all numbers that are auto-populated, meaning that they're already included on the tool when you download it. However, we can go through and change as many as we want. So let's say that I have, let's go 150 cows. And this one is set up for cows only. We will be theoretically, you could still use this as a small ruminant tool. You would have to update how many months you're milking, change some of your components. If you're milking goats, you would obviously not be producing 80 pounds a day, but you get the point. We can still use this tool. Um, but let's say that with our 150 cows, we are milking 70 pounds a day. That's our approximate fat protein ratio. We're milking 12 months out of the year. And so I have 20% here. You are not, the vast majority of on-farm operations are not processing 100% of their of their raw milk that they are producing. And there's many reasons for that, but let's just say that as a farmer, I am thinking that I might want to process 60% of my milk, which means that the other remaining 40% of that will go towards where I'm selling that raw milk already. And let's say that since I'm just getting my feet wet, I don't really want to consider processing anything other than a cream line milk, which is a non-standardized, non-homogenized, so full fat milk. So whatever comes out of my animals is going into that product. So let's say that 100% of what I process is going to be that non-standardized cream line milk, meaning that I don't need a separator and I don't need a homogenizer. And you can see that that has changed here on this line. So if I were to go and put in that I wanted to process 5%, we would now see an error because what I want to process is more than 100% of what I make. So this is just a check thing to make sure that we're doing our math correctly. But you will also see that because I selected a standardized product, we now have a separator and a homogenizer that are required. So just a reminder point. But let's go back because I don't want that. I want all of my milk to be cream line. And for ease, let's say that I want to process gallons. And let's say that I want 75% to be gallons. And I want, let's say 25% to be pints. So that way people can grab them out of the cooler, pay for it, and then leave and they have a single serve. So now we have that. That's what we want to process. Let's scroll down to our related cost. So this is going to play into our overall feasibility of the operation. So labor cost in hundredweight. And so this one, I do have a calculation to help us out with this one because this is set up a little weird and I personally would not know what my labor cost in hundredweight for the operation would be. However, there's this calculation that we can use to create it. Can you see the labor cost calculation pop-up window that just popped up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Elena. Okay, so we have our test employee here. It's employee 0, doesn't make any difference. That won't be added in. But let's say that I have employee 1. I'm going to skip the name. And let's say that I pay employee 1, and I am picking very random numbers right now. So let's say that employee 1 makes $10 an hour and works 40 hours a week. Let's save. Yes, I want to save. And then it pops up, rather than populating on this screen right now, we have employee number 2 that we can go ahead and enter. And let's say that I pay employee 2, let's go $8.50. And employee 2 works 20 hours a week. Let's save it again. Employee 3, let's go $15 an hour, and that employee works 60 hours a week. Yes, I realize these are crazy numbers, but it's what we're going with. I have saved that. I have my 3 employees. Now that I close that, here we have our list of employees. Now I can go through, you do not have to do this, but just to show you what would happen, we could select test employee and delete, and we would be able to delete that employee. Now, you do not have to do that because there's no data entered for that. It would skip that one. But let's go return to input. And this tells us that our total labor cost per hundredweight is $3.97. Now I can copy that value from the right here into our value on the left. So I can now take this and I can copy, and then I can go through and paste. And I now have my updated labor cost based off of the information that I entered. Now, cost to build the facility, the values that are populated are from a Tennessee survey. So these are the average cost across a Tennessee survey of farmstead dairies or on-farm processors. But let's say that it's going to, I got a quote done and based off of my quote, it will cost me, let's go 350,000 to build the facility. Our annual costs are approximated values, so I would leave these alone unless you have a really good understanding of what you think your cost will be. So we'll just leave these and say that we think this is what it will be. Cost to produce our raw milk, so that will be off of your that you can use from Dairy Gauge, your milk check. There's multiple ways you can access that information. So let's leave that alone. This is a number from about a year and a half ago. So let's just up it to $27. Now, our revenue streams. We have our mailbox milk price. That's what we are currently getting paid for our milk. And we'll leave that one alone. At $23.23. Again, these are values from last August, so a year ago. Our desired price, these are average cost based off of a market analysis that I ran from, again, a year ago. These were the average costs, and I picked products that had a little bit higher cost than our generic grocery store milk that we see. That way we could see a little bit higher range. But you can also see here if you want to put your own in, these are suggested market adjustments for that. But honestly, unless you have a set value that you specifically want to sell your milk for, I would leave them alone for now, just because this is a generic model right now. So now let's go down to our bottling equipment. So I know I can scroll down here. I can put my own equipment in if I want to. So if I have a quote from a company, I can go through, click the quoted vat pasteurizer and adjust my price capacity, which is how much in gallons that you're wanting to process. I'm sorry, how many gallons that the quoted pasteurizer, for example, can actually handle. So if that's a 500-gallon vat pasteurizer, we would change it to 500 gallons. However, I don't have a quote, so let's say, because we said 500 gallons, I think I might want a 500-gallon vat pasteurizer. It populates a cost based off of quotes that I received from these equipment when I was building this tool. Because I have a vat pasteurizer, I don't need an HTST system. I'm not processing any kind of standardized homogenized milk. So I don't need any of this equipment. But I do need a bottler. So let's say that, and I had a very difficult time building this tool in getting quotes for bottling equipment. So that is why you see just this one here. You are more than welcome to fill in your own quote. As I'm able to get my hands on more quotes, I will be updating this. However, right now, I do not have any additional information. But I know that I want to process gallons, so let's say that I want the average speed of this gravity filler that processes a gallon. And we see that some of these values changed. Now, these are our, quote, major bottling equipment pieces. But we also have additional equipment. So that's not the only equipment that we need. We have to have bulk tanks. Might need holding tanks, mixing tanks if we're doing different flavors, clean out of place systems, chillers. There's many things that we could need. Now, these are all, again, average prices based off of what we've seen from our survey, as well as from data received from SDBII grants. So, this is our generic. Here, I'm going to leave it alone because I personally am not looking at any other quotes. So we're going to use the data in the system. And this one, I generally recommend for our debt financing that we leave it alone unless you have lender information that says differently. And this is slightly high of a rate at 8.5%. We have a 20-year loan, down payment of 20%, and then 80% is what we will finance for the construction. And that's that difference in that 120% down payment. So 80% is what we'll finance. So now if you were to want to go back and reset, you could hit reset. It would populate the main numbers that we had, or you could hit clear and it would clear the entire tool. However, I've picked all of my numbers, so we're going to hit next page. And this is our first of our output screen, or what tells us what we can process. So on here, we see in this green box, we have that I'm not processing any whole milk. I'm not processing any reduced fat milk, low fat milk, or skim milk. But I am processing based off of my numbers that I entered for my 150 cows and processing 60% of my herd's milk. We're processing 613 gallons a day of creamline milk. We also have that in liters. That's if you want to look at that, you're more than welcome to. And then this is just a check over here on the right that says percent of the raw milk actually used. So you'll see a little bit less here when you get into some of these other values, but whatever we are getting from our raw product, we are using. Let's see. So because we're not separating out, we don't have any potential residual skim or cream that could be used in other products. And we do have, based off of that, I wanted to process 75% of my operation into gallons and then 25% into pints. We see that I have about 460 gallons that I would have to process, and then 1,225 pints. We have a lot that we can process. Now, if we scroll down, we have our growth capacity. So what this tells us and is based off of the equipment that I have chosen, which is the your choice here. What this tells us is what's my limiting equipment piece. So if I wanted to grow, how much could I grow to max out that limiting piece? So, based off of the data that I presented and the equipment I selected, I'm only using 10% of that overall equipment capability, meaning that I can grow my average production per day, which is crazy, not realistic numbers. But because we have such a low at 10%, we see that we could grow by 309 pounds per day. We could also add 662 animals per day, or sorry, 662 cows total to maximize that 500-gallon pasteurizer. Now, if we look at our most efficient, the way that the most efficient works is this will tell us an equipment grouping that runs fastest, meaning that we process in the least amount of time. However, one of the limitations of this is one cost because we're selecting very, very, very high capacity equipment that we likely will never use. The next is our most economical, meaning that the cheapest option that we could possibly go for. And then a basic pasteurizer and bottler, which essentially in the scenario that I've given you is the exact same as the My Choice. because all we're doing is processing a creamline product. Now, this big long statement here in green says to process 60% of your herd's milk, which is what I've entered, I need to process 5,000, a little over 5,000 pounds per day. Based on my desired production, I will have 6 extra pints of bottled milk, no gallons of unused cream that will be bottled. Any leftover cream, if I were to have any, I would be able to see a cost right here of what that would be, or a price. However, because I'm not, we can ignore that. So essentially, it's a summary of everything that we've set up here. Now, instead of returning to instructions, I want to know because I'm curious, what's that most efficient and most economical equipment options look? What do those look like? So let's go to see suggested equipment. And now there's this very key thing that I like to point out here. So the total time when we look at these equipments does not include cleanup time. So that is something that you have to consider. So if, for this instance, the equipment that I chose, which is my choice, so the equipment that I selected, it would take me 2 hours and 32 minutes to process everything that I want to process that day. But that doesn't include my startup cleanup time. That is just equipment actively running. Now, if I want to do flavors, we'll have to add in extra time for cleaning equipment. However, the process that we go about that. For equipment costs, we can see a breakdown per equipment. Again, capacity utilized is how much of that equipment is actually being utilized, the time required for each equipment, and the extra capacity in animals and pounds. And this PP, NPV, and IRR right here are what help to tell us, is this actually a feasible operation financially? So a payback period of this would be 1.93 years, which is a very, very low rate. A net present value, meaning that at the end of that 20-year period, what would my operation return? What could I sell? It'd be about what would I have gained, rather? What would I have gained by doing this versus the alternative, which is not processing? I would have an additional just over $3.5 million. And then our IRR, which is internal rate of return, or essentially our riskiness rate, is 61%. So now if we look down at that most efficient, which is what I was interested in, we can see that this one says that we should go with an inline pasteurizer that has a crazy high capacity, a separator, a homogenizer, and then this bottler. This is our equipment cost. We see our total equipment cost, our added cost, which is all of that extra equipment that we need. We would see that it would only take us 37 minutes to process the day's worth of milk. And we can see here, if we scroll over, that it would take us 2.8 years to pay back a net present value of just over $3 million, and then an internal rate of return of 45%. The same thing with our most economical, which is our lowest price alternative, assuming that we use all equipment pieces. And then our basic pasteurizer and bottler. So this page gives you an idea of some different options you can go. But I would caution that with this tool, as with everything, there still are some assumptions that we have made in this entire model. So take these numbers with a grain of salt. Now let's go next. We were on our output page. We are now on our suggested equipment. The next page that we have to look at is our equipment list. So this shows the equipment, a breakdown of every single equipment piece that we have included in the model. And you'll see this quoted at the bottom of each section. This one is where you will enter your quote. And we see 25 days here. That's our default value for we have no information. But here you can compare. So if I want to look at a 500 gallon versus a 200 gallon or a 300 gallon, I can compare those values and how that would change my processing. Now, if I want to go through, I could go oh, back to our output page, and then I could print this out as a PDF. So if I want to take this and show my lender, or I want to show my business partner what this tool says and we want to talk about it, we could print, export to PDF. I'm saving it, which you probably cannot see on screen, but I'm about to share my screen with you to where you can see it. Share. Okay. And here's the output that we would see. So all I did was export to PDF. I saved it to where I wanted to. And all the information that we've looked at, including everything that I entered, is all on these pages. So we can see everything here and I can print that out, take that to wherever I need to take it, or save it for my records. Okay, now let's go back. And then now that we're finished, I've used the tool how I want to. Now I'm going to go back, hit return to instructions, pop-up window that says, thank you for using this tool. And we're back at the beginning. Now I can hit reset if I want to go back, or clear if I want to go back and try to use the tool again, see how my values change based off of different numbers. So that is the basic rundown of how to work this bottled milk decision tool. Let's see. So we're at 119 now. So I have about 10 minutes. I don't know that that's enough time to go through the cheese one. However, I'm more than happy to pop it up and show you guys what the cheese tool looks like if that's something you're interested in, or I can stay on after and we can do that. Or you guys can ask questions as you have them.
Feel free if you want, Caitlin, to go
Yeah.
ahead and pop up that cheese tool.
Okay.
We had a question come through earlier, but it was just asking if they could get copies of these. So what
Mhm.
I'll do in our follow-up email is I'll share the links from the UT Dairy website
Yes.
in the follow-up email. That way folks can get access to those tools.
Yes. And I will also let's see. I will share my little slideshow at the bottom of the very last page on my slideshow, which I didn't show you guys, does have links to UT Dairy, SDBII, our LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram pages for those as well. And you can access it from there. But I will go ahead and pop up the cheese tool real quickly. Mm, Make sure that I'm looking at the correct one. Okay. Before I share screen, real quick. Okay. Um, all right. Sharing screen. Cheese. Okay. So this cheese one, I won't go through a super detailed how to on this one, but you'll notice that it looks very similar to the bottled milk one, except you'll see a distinction here that says cheese processing. And then we'll see a little difference. Instead of what we want for milk, we have what we want for cheese. Now, if we hit start, go here, again, looks very similar. You'll see some differences here, which I have because we're looking at cheese in general, not just a cheddar or not just a mozzarella. We have all different kinds of cheeses included on here. We can change it based off of what we want. And you can see on the screen to the right, recommended aging times, types of cheeses that would be included in each one, and then our yield, which is essentially how much cheese you're getting from your raw milk. And then there is a caveat that anything aged less than 60 days must be pasteurized. Make sure. that is the case. Scroll down here, we have very similar labor. Now, instead of labor per hundredweight, as in the last tool, we do labor per hour here. That was just a fine tune that we did as we went from transitioning the cheese tool into this tool, something that hopefully makes it a little bit easier. And we have walkthroughs again on how to do everything, what our calculated costs are, desired cheese prices. Again, a market analysis over to the right so you can see approximate cheese prices. If you're not sure what you want to market your product for, you can select something from that list. And then here we have our different equipment options. There's a whole lot more for cheese than there is for ice or for bottled milk. And then we have again additional processing equipment that you might need. And we see a very large breakdown here of everything that we can possibly include. And again, that debt financing. And we'll just roll with the numbers we have on our next page. This is our first output. You see again a similar layout, but this one tells us um, how many pounds we're processing. Process 49% of our herd's milk. We have to process 67,000 pounds per, sorry, 6,700 pounds per day, not 67,000. And then we can go to our overall equipment. We see payback period again, net present value, and internal rate of return on this bottom right here. Our total processing time, total investment cost, broken down based off of equipment. And then we can go to see outputs. Again, that similar breakdown if we want to compare between a two-head vertical A-frame cheese press and a four-head vertical A-frame cheese press. Scroll down all the possible equipment options. And then once we get through, we can go back to the beginning and redo it if we want to. So a super brief rundown of that one, but so in the works, we do have, let me stop sharing really quick. So in the works, we are working on a ice cream one right now. The end goal is to be able to have all of these tools interact together to where there would be a drop-down menu of, if you want, you would select all the products you want to process. So if you want to process ice cream and fluid milk, you would select both of those, and then you would go through on each tool, use that, they would talk to each other. That's the end goal. That is not something that I have a definitive timeline on. That is something that we are slowly working towards. There's a lot of coding that goes into the background behind these tools, but just something to think for in the future.
We did have there are two questions in the Q&A, Caitlin,
Okay.
but you may have addressed part of them already.
Okay.
Um, so the first one asked, how could you make adjustments for flavored milk?
Mhm.
They only caught part of your comments on that.
Yeah, so that's a great one. So in the tool right now, I do not have it set up to where we can select flavored milks. The base for that one was just a standard white milk. Um, we probably, that's something that I would like to add in. We could use a adjusting our cost a little bit right now just to account for that. But as far as giving an actual option for processors and users to select to upgrade on that, on the tool, we do not have something included in that yet.
And the second one asks, so what was the geographic area for your market analysis
Hmm.
for fluid and cheese?
Great question. So that was the entire southeastern region. I went on to as many different websites that I could find. I called different grocery stores, different supermarkets to try to pull as much information as I could to gather those prices. But I did do that across the southeast. Well, I say the Southeast. I did that for Tennessee, North Carolina, and Kentucky specifically because that was at the time the three states we were looking at.
And we got one more. Does the tool consider overtime pay when applicable?
Great question. It does not consider overtime pay. That is something that we certainly could add to it. That's not something I had thought about, honestly. I think that's something that definitely we can look at seeing if there is a way to add that in, though.
Perfect. Thank you so much. While we've got just a couple more minutes, I'm going to go ahead and pop that evaluation survey slide up. Give me just a second while I do that. And if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to keep asking those.
And like I said earlier, I will work on figuring out what that issue was with that macros because that's one I haven't seen before. But that's a good thing because that means that we didn't troubleshoot all the macro issues like I thought we had. So I will work on getting that. And then as soon as I have an answer, Elena, I will send that to you. However you want to disperse that would be great. And then I'm open for any questions. If you wouldn't care to share my email,
Mhm.
Elena, I'm more than happy to answer any questions via email that anyone has about the tool, whether that's questions about functionality or questions about ways or suggestions about ways that we could improve it for future use. That would be amazing.
Perfect. Yes, I will include all that information in the follow-up email that goes out once we conclude our live session. This is our evaluation survey QR code up on the screen. There's also a link there that will take you to the Qualtrics survey to give feedback and record your attendance for today's session. If any of you guys have any other questions for the folks that are still on with us, feel free to pop those into the chat or use the that Q&A feature. If you don't have any questions, I think this brings us to the end of today's session. So we will come back in September and we will have folks speaking about their experience at the 2026 NAFTMA Agritourism Convention and Expo that was held in Orlando, Florida. So be on the lookout for more information about that session. And thank you, Caitlin, for walking us through these tools and sharing all this great information from SDBII.